Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alex Noir, and I'm part of the team at OpenAI leading our AI education efforts through OpenAI Academy. We're super glad that you're here today. Whether this is your first time engaging with AI or you've already started exploring tools like ChatGPT, this session is designed with you in mind. We'll be introducing a few key concepts, walking through some useful demos, and most importantly, showing how nonprofits like yours can safely and responsibly start using AI to support your missions. This event is part of a larger initiative called the AI for Nonprofits Sprint, led by the Fund for the City of New York, with support from Just Tech and Compass Pro Bono. Today's session will be led by Rich Lemsider, the Director of AI for Nonprofits Sprint. Rich is an experienced nonprofit leader and educator who's helped thousands of nonprofit professionals around New York City understand and integrate AI into their work. He's known for his practical, incremental approach, and we're really excited to have him guiding us through the next 60 minutes. After his talk, we'll open up a 30-minute Q&A, and an expert from OpenAI will join us for that portion of the program. We know that AI can feel like a big, fast-moving topic, but our goal today is to meet you where you are. We believe this technology can unlock real impact when placed in the hands of people who are already solving some of society's hardest problems. So thank you again for joining. And with that, I will hand over to Rich to get us started.
Thank you so much, Alex. Hi, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you all today. Really grateful to partner with OpenAI and the OpenAI Academy. We are partners with OpenAI on the AI for Nonprofits Sprint generally, and then really excited to see so many of the staff of our nonprofit Sprint allies here in the room today, as well as folks who are coming connected through the OpenAI connections. That introduction was really terrific. I'm not going to spend much more time discussing what we're up to today. I think we ought to dive right in. And so I'm going to share some slides. As Alex said, I'll be presenting kind of one way for the next 60 minutes or so, sharing some of our thoughts and perspectives about how AI can best be used, how it is being used in the nonprofit sector as we see it right now, and giving some guidance and guidelines as you all may be working through it. I do want to also just repeat my appreciations for our co-sponsors today, the folks at the organizations Just Tech and Compass Pro Bono, who do amazing work with nonprofit organizations supporting technology, supporting volunteerism, and who help spread the word, get the word out about today's session. So introductions, you already heard a little bit about me. I'll tell you a little bit more about me in a moment. Grateful not only for Alex, but for his colleague, Mohammed Hussein, who'll be joining us at the end of the hour for that Q&A, able to bring some perspectives from OpenAI, the organization that built ChatGPT, that kind of got all of this conversation about the new generation of AI started in the United States and around the world. Again, yeah, I said thanks already to the Just Tech and Compass Pro Bono friends, but I also want to share an introduction to a couple of robots. I want to show right off the bat some things that are possible and are happening these days with AI. So I'm showing you right now a program called Suno. Suno is an independent company, a program. They have this tool, Suno Creates Songs. And this is actually the free version. I haven't paid any money for Suno to do its work, but we're going to ask Suno to create a song for us here on what is in New York, a nice sunny day here on the East Coast. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know folks may be tuning into this webinar from anywhere in the world, but here in New York City, it's cold, but it's sunny. I'm going to give Suno these instructions. I'd like a song that is an energetic Afrobeat song about nonprofit workers who are learning AI, and I want it to alternate the lyrics in English, Korean, and Haitian Creole, a sort of less common language in the world. So let's see if Suno is able to get that done. Then while that's working, I saw in the registration form, we have a number of people in the conversation today from the national nonprofit in the United States called NPower, that does great technology literacy job training for thousands of people. Here's a press release I found on your website, on NPower's website, really nice bit of information about a recent grant that NPower received, but it's a pretty straightforward PDF press release format. Good information, a little bit boring. I'm going to use this tool called Notebook LM. Notebook LM has been around for more than a year, but a few months ago, they created a new feature. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to upload that PDF document, that press release we had been looking at earlier. And I am going to ask Notebook LM to do its thing. And I'm going to customize my instructions. I'm going to say, use lots of soccer metaphors. And I'm going to have Notebook LM do its work. We'll come back to that in a couple of minutes and see, live demos in the AI world, any kind of technology live demo, you always have to have your fingers crossed. So we hope this works. We hope that the programs work the way we want them to, because there's no going back. We're doing this live in front of this audience. Alex gave a great introduction. I always tell people if there were a drink made out of limes, it would be lime cider. That's my name, Rich Lime Cider. I've been in the nonprofit sector most of my career. Recently, I was the executive director of a nonprofit organization that provides free lawyers to children in the New York area in the United States who are being actively deported, that the government was trying to remove them from this country. And right now, I'm the director of the AI for Nonprofits Sprint, which operates out of a large NGO in New York called the Fund for the City of New York. And our goal is to run a campaign. We started in September of last year, and our project is currently oriented just through the summer to work actively with 100 non-tech nonprofits. That is, nonprofits that were not necessarily built around entrepreneurial technology, but are doing important work in the community, job training, working with homeless populations, teaching students. And our focus is to help 5,000 everyday workers reach a measurable level of AI literacy by the summer of this year. And so this conversation that we're having today is a really key part of that. Now, I'd love to ask you all to fill out this poll. And Alex, I think there's some fancy way that you can also share the link. You can do this poll by picking up your phone. I know so many of us, we don't get far without having our phones around. So if you're sitting in front of a computer, but you have your phone next to you, go to the QR code. There's a 1-minute poll that links from this QR code. Or Alex may have sent out this Google link. You can open it up by clicking right through to the poll on your web browser. And we're just going to spend 30 seconds, 45 seconds. Oh, I didn't put it in front of you all. Here it is. Now we're looking at the poll. Alex, definitely feel free to jump on and let me know if I'm forgetting to share the thing that I'm supposed to be sharing. So here's the QR code that's in front of you. Alex may be sending out the link as well. If you can find your way to this poll, it shouldn't take you more than 30 seconds once you're there. It's a couple of yes/no questions, but we'd like to understand how you all are feeling about AI in the world. And so I'm actually looking at the poll right now. This is the poll as you see it. Had you heard of ChatGPT? How do you use it? How often are you using it? Have you ever found your way to one of those paid levels? We're learning that the $20 a month version of ChatGPT or similar programs really does have substantially heightened capacities. And so when we're trying to learn about whether or not AI can be useful to us, getting to one of those paid levels is valuable. And have you been given guidance? Has your employer told you what is or isn't okay? Do you feel expert or not? And then in general, how do you feel about AI these days? Do you feel terrified? Do you feel enthusiastic? So feel free to continue to go through and plug in your answers. Take another 30 seconds. I'm going to show you the answers we've already gotten. Wow, we've already gotten more than 400 responses just in the few seconds that I've been prattling on and trying to stall, and they're still coming in. But overwhelmingly, of course, since most of you found your way to this webinar, you've heard of AI. You've overwhelmingly used it. And more than half of you are using it every single day. So a pretty engaged audience, but a substantial number of us, dozens and dozens of us have never used it. Most of you are not using one of the paid subscription models, and you overwhelmingly do not have guidance from your employers about what is or isn't okay. And we'll talk a little bit later about the consequences when we don't have a clear sense of what we're allowed to do. Pretty typical, normal statistical distribution of your level of expertise. Most of you rate yourselves a 3, with a number of you feeling quite skilled and others thinking maybe you don't know so much at all. But this is not what we always see. You're overwhelmingly enthusiastic about AI, although nevertheless, a solid 10% of us here still have some substantial questions and would like to learn more. And we're going to address this conversation for everybody, but we'll adjust the tone to reflect, in part, the level of enthusiasm that we see here today. Okay, so keep going. If you need a couple more seconds, please take it. There is a lot of jargon. There's a lot of vocabulary in the world of AI these days. And some people act as though you need a computer science degree or at least some kind of fancy certificate in artificial intelligence in order to get started. At the AI Sprint, we argue that the exact opposite is true. We all use very sophisticated technologies every single day. We use cell phones, we drive cars. Most of us don't really have a particularly sophisticated understanding of how those things work. When we type out a document in Microsoft Word or Google Docs, most of us don't know how those software programs were coded, but we're still able to use them and get a lot of effectiveness out of it. We argue that actually the most important thing about engaging with AI is understanding some of the ethical safety perspectives and then understanding how to get started using it. If you know these 4 terms, you can have a very thoughtful conversation about AI in 95% of the contexts that you're going to find yourself. You can talk thoughtfully about AI with your colleagues. You can talk thoughtfully about AI with family members at a dinner. You can even speak about AI with a sophisticated AI staff person like Mohammed, who we're going to see in just a few minutes. Artificial intelligence is any technique that allows a computer, or really a machine, to act like a person. And so when we understand how broad that term is, you can understand why mechanical devices that were built in the 1950s to try to get systems to play chess could also be described as artificial intelligence. It's also clear that even before the more recent versions of AI came out a few years ago, programs like Netflix, social media, were using AI in Netflix, for example, if you've ever watched a TV show and had it recommend the next TV show it thought you should watch, that was a version of artificial intelligence. Machine learning was a more recent development when computer scientists realized they could ask the computers to help them improve the quest for artificial intelligence. So the machines started to do some of the work, not just people setting things up. And then a large language model was an innovation from just the past couple of years, which was essentially the discovery that if you took a modern computer, something fast with a really big brain, and you pointed it at the entire internet, and you said, take 3 or 4 months, go read the internet. Go read every web page out there. Go read every research paper you can find. Go read every post to Facebook that seems publicly available. And in fact, go read every conspiracy theory and things that are not quite correct. If the computer went out and read everything it could find out there, when it came back, it was able to act like a person in a much more believable way than any of the other kinds of software that had ever been invented. So it was just a discovery of how do you create one of these fake people in a more plausible way. And generative AI is what we're going to be talking about today. Generative AI is artificial intelligence that creates something new from scratch where it didn't exist before. So instead of having maybe a couple of spreadsheets and matching up information from one row to another row, generative AI can create something original. Now, the important thing to understand about generative AI, since it may sound to many of us like a fancy new term, is that it's the exact same thing as autocomplete. If you have ever been texting on your phone and your phone tries to make a prediction about what your word is, what the word you're typing, or the next word after that, that's really all generative AI is. When we are typing in a prompt or a question to a program like ChatGPT, like Google Gemini or Microsoft Copilot, all it's doing is creating a very sophisticated way of guessing what is the first word I might write in answer to this question, then the second word, the full sentence, a paragraph, even a 10-page research paper is a sophisticated autocomplete of what you have typed in and asked for. I also think it's important to talk about this. This is something that social scientists have brought up for several decades. It's called the technology hype cycle. And the idea of the hype cycle is an observation that when a new technology comes out, frankly, many of the people who are most excited about it, or the people who are trying to sell us something with that new technology, really overinflate what the technology can do. And so we get all kinds of excited articles and news reports and blog posts. This thing is going to change everything in the entire world. The change is going to happen in the next 7 days, and nothing will ever be the same. Then there's often a backlash, and we wind up seeing the exact same level of energy and conversation, but with the total opposite perspective. This thing is completely useless. It has no valuable contribution at all, or it's the devil and it's going to destroy society as it is. For most new technologies that we've seen over the past several decades, things basically come back into a midpoint where the technology may in fact not be as transformative or incredible as was first promised, but neither is it useless or worth or basically are we even capable of ignoring it in the long term. Now, we don't know if this is the description that's going to apply to AI. This is a social scientist's observation. This isn't a law of physics. But I find this a useful framework when thinking about some of the really heated conversation that's happening about artificial intelligence in the world. Okay, so we've talked for a couple of minutes. Let's see if we can go check in on those robots. It wrote a song for us called Shining Minds, and I'm hoping you all can hear it. And if the sound doesn't come through, maybe one of my colleagues will chime in and let me know.
Under the sun we're gathered today. 우리 곁에 빛나는 꿈. 먼저 let's breathe the sun open. Brighter futures find their way. This was in the breeze. 선명해지는 우리 마음. 너 feliz se don't global hearts like trees.
Okay, so let's talk about what we're seeing here. In the past couple of minutes, this program responded to my prompt and it wrote lyrics to a song. And if you've been using ChatGPT, like many of us in this conversation have, this may not seem very different from things that you've tried. In fact, one of the very first things I ever asked ChatGPT to do a couple of years ago was to write a song in the style of Taylor Swift for my daughter, a song in the style of Kendrick and Drake for my son. We've done songwriting, poetry writing. It did that very quickly. What it also did was it was able to create lyrics in 3 languages. And not just Korean, which you might think has, Korea has an advanced technology society. There's, tens of millions of people who speak Korean, but it was also able to create pretty credible lyrics in Haitian Creole, which is not necessarily one of the top 10 languages that software tools are asked to write in. Created lyrics in multiple languages. Then it created the music. So this is not from a library of tracks. It said, okay, this guy, Rich Limesider, has asked me for something that's like Afro beats with a female voice. And it said, okay, maybe that starts with a C note and I should use these kinds of instruments. And then it goes to an F sharp minor and an A major. It created that musical track in that generative AI way from scratch. And then it did the same thing with the human voices. So again, this is not a library of people who sang every word into a recording. It was able to figure out what's the megahertz, what's the tone of a human voice, and how do I shape that into the words and map it to the beat that we've created. This is a free program. It did it in about 2 minutes. So this is the state of one example of the state of some of the generative AI that we're in today, and lots more beyond. Okay, we had this PDF press release, and we asked this program, Notebook LM, to do something interesting, and let's hear what it came up with.
All right, so you know how in soccer, everyone needs to be on the same page. Like they got to know the rules, got to have some skills to really play the game right.
Yeah, definitely. Like you can't just chuck someone out on the pitch with no clue what's going on, right?
Exactly. And in a way, the digital world, it's kind of like that too, right? You need those basic digital skills to navigate it properly.
Absolutely. It's becoming more and more essential all the time.
And that's what we're going to dive into today. This organization called Empower, they're doing some really interesting work.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of them. They're focused on helping young adults and military folks from low-income backgrounds, right?
Okay, so what happened here? We uploaded a 2-page PDF in some boring text, and we had this program, Notebook LM, put together almost instantaneously a blog post guided by my advice, hey, put in lots of soccer metaphors. So they were talking about soccer, and then they started to bring in the kinds of things that were visible in the PDF document. Okay, so those were the robots that we were going to try to get some early examples from. I want to highlight that for the average NGO, nonprofit organization, there's a key distinction that is really vital to understand. What we at the AI for Nonprofits sprint refer to as exponential AI are those big change everything projects that frankly get most of the attention in the world right now. These are pretty exciting things. Self-driving cars, ways to cure cancer. In the nonprofit sector, we're hearing about, are there going to be new AI tools, bots, where someone who needs math tutoring won't have to interact with a person, but will be able to allow millions of children around the world to improve their literacy, to improve their math skills, their numeracy, simply by engaging with AI. That may happen. That's pretty exciting. Many of those projects don't actually exist yet. And one thing we do know is they're going to require real dedicated resources, experts, large data sets. And especially for those of us that are working with vulnerable populations, we are going to want to make sure we get those things exactly right. Right? If we're going to use AI to recommend to a judge whether a person should be released from prison or not, a 95% accuracy rate is not okay. We need 99.99999. That may take time, that may take resources. Many of our nonprofit organizations aren't in a place where we're ready to access those possibilities. However, there's a whole other perspective on AI, which we call incremental AI, and that's mostly what we're going to be talking about today. The idea of incremental AI is that with a more modest set of goals, we can be engaging with the kinds of tools like ChatGPT that are already available in a very sophisticated way. We don't have to build anything from scratch. Almost every single one of us working in the nonprofit sector knows that we and our colleagues are using software all the time. We're sending emails, we're creating spreadsheets, we're writing memos and documents. Incremental uses of AI, the generative AI tools such as ChatGPT or things like Claude or others, are already available to us in an off-the-shelf kind of way, and we should be taking advantage of these things right now in a way that allows us to make use become maybe 10 or 15% more efficient, not 200 or 300% more efficient. But this is a moment in particular, especially for the nonprofit sector in the United States, where we need every potential resource we have available to us. So, historical context, the reason we're all having this conversation is absolutely because OpenAI, our friends, released this pretty amazing, I write pretty good, almost tongue-in-cheek, generative AI model. It was version 3.5 in November of 2022, and the world went bananas, kind of lost its stuff. Today, there are a number of good public models out there that can do some different things. I'm showing examples for the rest of the day today, mostly in ChatGPT. We're up to version 4.5. That's usually my go-to. There are other strong models out there. Many nonprofits are already existing in a Microsoft world where they're using a tool called Copilot, which is actually driven by the technology of OpenAI and ChatGPT. You might be in a Google environment where Gemini is what's available to you. So let's take a look. Let's actually see what we can do when we have access to these tools in the nonprofit sector. The best advice I've ever heard about how you get started when you're really trying to build your intuition and your understanding of how to work with a generative AI tool is to start with 3 core skills: reading, writing, and chatting. Now, if you are someone who's doing computer coding already as a regular part of your day job and you want to start with that, if you're writing formulas and creating sophisticated spreadsheets and you actually want to start using AI for that, by all means do so. For most people in the nonprofit sector, reading, writing, and chatting is something that we have to do every single day. And those happen to be 3 skills that generative AI tools are particularly good at. And so when you're getting started, when you're building your first 5 hours, 10 hours of experience, building your abilities, coming up with your own examples of how it can be helpful to you at work, these are 3 ways to get going. So let me show you an example of each. Here's an example of, in kind of a broad way, what I would describe as reading. I was given a video of a 90-minute presentation, not so different than the one we're doing right now, where 3 people were speaking on a panel. I wanted to know what one of them in particular was talking about, but I didn't want to spend 90 minutes watching the video. So I pasted in the link to a YouTube video directly into ChatGPT, and it went ahead and summarized it for me. Then I was able to ask a specific question. What does that person, Jen Kotler, have to say? And I got a 1-paragraph answer, right? Now remember, it spent about 20 seconds watching that 90-minute video. So already that's kind of incredible. But I realized that when working with a generative AI tool, one of the most important intuitions is that it's very different than internet search. Most of us were raised using Google. You go to something, you type for what you're looking for, and it spits out an answer, and either the answer is what you wanted or it wasn't, and you go away. The intuition when working with an AI tool like ChatGPT is that it's a fake person. We have to have a conversation. We go back and forth. So this was a 1-paragraph answer. I realized I hadn't actually given it an assignment precise enough to get what I was really looking for. So I did a follow-up. I said, write a detailed outline of all of her comments. And now I get a much more sophisticated response where ChatGPT has watched the 90-minute video. It gives me a summary of everything this person, Jen Kotler, had to say with clear outlines of topic areas, what the bullet points of her key comments were about those major topic areas. And I essentially get a 1-page summary. This entire conversation took me maybe 3 minutes instead of watching that 90-minute video. So there's an example of reading. Here's an example of what I would describe as writing. I've asked for help writing my own bio. Now, people can talk about whether there are challenges with accuracy or bias. Those are things we should pay careful attention to, especially when working with vulnerable populations, data on vulnerable populations. And we can talk about how to mitigate, how to manage concerns about AI in those contexts. When I'm asking AI to help write my bio based on my resume, it's pretty easy for me to manage some of those concerns. If it puts in there that I'm an astronaut and I've been to Mars 4 times, I'll be very aware when I read it to look for those errors. In this case, it gave me 0 errors. One of the other key things to understand about working with generative AI is that when you give it information to work off of, the concern about errors, bias are reduced 100-fold, because rather than giving answers from its experience reading the entire internet, you're actually getting answers much more restricted to the information, the trusted information that you've provided. So I uploaded my resume. I said, do me a favor, write my bio in 250 words, right? Many of us need a bio, or you might be speaking on a webinar with OpenAI and hundreds and hundreds of people out there. I think we have more than 1,000 maybe today. Write my bio. Great. Writes me a perfectly serviceable bio of the length I need. Rich Limesider is a seasoned leader. One of the criticisms I get, and I actually heard this on a call just an hour ago, is, well, when I use these AI tools, the language seems kind of boring. It's grammatically correct, but it's just so plain vanilla. And sometimes I write things where I need it to really reflect a particular tone. I need it to be better written than this average text. Well, what I say is, if you were a fake person who learned how to be like a person by reading the whole internet, every time somebody asked you a question, you give an answer from the dead center of your knowledge, right? You've read about French literature, and you've read about conspiracy theories, and you've read physics papers, and you've read social media posts. So yeah, the average of what you've read in your life is pretty average. But there's no reason we need to end there. Remember, it's always a conversation, and we can always give feedback. So in this case, I said, now I want a more playful and jaunty version of my bio. And instead of being a seasoned leader, now I'm a dynamo in the social sector. Now, I said AI can be thought of as a fake person, but it's a fake person that never gets tired, period, never gets annoyed by your feedback, unlike maybe some of the colleagues we work with who don't always want to hear our feedback or our request for a second version or a third version or a 10th version. So it had just written a complete second 250-word bio. You can even make stuff up and be playful. I said, give me something that's 42% more jaunty. What does that even mean? Who knows? But now my bio says I'm a swashbuckler. I'm some kind of pirate, right? So we can go back, we can customize the tone that we're looking for as often as we want. Reading, now writing. And then here's what I would describe as chatting. A little bit of maybe a more sophisticated engagement, but a fake person who's read everything on the internet can actually pretend to be a lot of different other kinds of people. And we know from work as managers, from work in the professional development world over decades, scientists, researchers know, effective managers know that role playing is one of the most powerful professional development things you can do. If you have a tough conversation coming up with a client, a tough conversation coming up with your boss, or someone that you are the manager of, someone on your board, it's incredibly useful to practice those conversations before you head into them. In this case, I said to ChatGPT, I'd like your help with some professional development role playing. And then I wrote out a little scenario. Didn't have to be all that sophisticated. I said, I'm a new manager at a senior citizen drop-in center, right? I work with the elderly. We have one wonderful client who's been getting very upset. His daughter is upset at something that might have happened here at the center, and she's coming in. I'm nervous about meeting with her. Can we practice? And then I asked ChatGPT, just as I'd ask a real person who was going to help me with a role play, hey, before we actually start this role play, do you have any questions for me? Sure. I get these very sophisticated questions from this fake person, right? Do you have any details? Have you previously interacted with the client or their daughter? Do you think that there's anything about your organization that might have contributed to the situation? What's your goal for the meeting? But because it's a fake person, not a real person, when I answer those thoughtful questions, I can answer them in 1 or 2 words at a time. I don't have to ask how their weekend went or what their vacation plans are. It's boom, boom, boom. No incidents. Never met daughter. I get on well with dad, etc., etc. I give a couple more instructions. I say, I might not be very good. Don't stop the role play until I type stop role play. And now we go. Now we're practicing. The daughter walks in, visibly tense. Hi, I'm really glad you're meeting with me today. Now I decided to practice being terrible at my job. So I wrote, whoa, lady, chill out. Let's not assume it's our fault. Maybe something at your house is the problem. ChatGPT responds to the situation appropriately to help me with my role playing. The daughter's face reddens. She leans forward slightly. Excuse me? And we go back and forth. We have a conversation until I tell the computer, stop the role play. And then not only did I get the experience of practicing, I can say, yes, please give me feedback as though you're a social worker with years of experience. Great. Here's the particular kinds of feedback. And it gives me a thoughtful memo on how I did, what was positive, but where the areas of improvement were. Reading, writing, and chatting. Right now, if you're trying to make sense of all the AI that's out there in the world, even just within the world of generative AI, I would make the proposition that we're looking at basically 3 categories at the moment. There are generalist tools, and ChatGPT and other things like Claude, Copilot, Gemini. Those are generalists. You can get a tremendous amount done in lots of different domains. Whether you're an HR professional, accounting, finance, a social worker, a graphic designer, there's some amazing things you can get done in those generalist tools. Increasingly, there are companies that would like to sell us specialist tools. And things like Suno, the songwriter that I showed you, are examples of programs that really just focus on trying to solve one particular issue or for one particular type of person. Perplexity does research, Grantable is for fundraising, Grammarly, many of you used to improve your writing. Many of those specialists, you should be aware, aren't in fact creating their own AI models. It's very difficult and very expensive to create something as sophisticated as ChatGPT. So what many of those specialists are doing is creating a really nice front page that feels like a more comfortable way, and then they're actually running ChatGPT secretly in the background. And then, as we all are also seeing, AI is increasingly integrated into other stuff that we do, frankly, whether we ask for it or not. Apple is putting AI on our phones with this thing called Apple Intelligence. If you do a search query in Google, it's giving you a little one-paragraph summary at the top. If you're trying to buy something on Amazon these days, you may have noticed that they're using AI to summarize the product reviews so that you can sort of get a sense of how everybody feels about this particular product. We think, and I'm sure you're already getting this message, that if you become comfortable with incremental AI, you are going to get hours back every single week that you can decide how you should use. Maybe it's a way of fighting burnout and getting home sooner. Maybe at your organization, it's a way of taking on more clients, more students, more patients. But we also think it's vital, regardless of your ultimate perspective on AI, regardless of how enthusiastic you wind up being, we think it's vital that people become expert or at least competent in incremental AI so that you can participate in those conversations at your organization and frankly, even across society about what role AI can and should play in the work that all of us are doing and are going to be doing. Many of you here on this conversation today are at the higher level of experience, of enthusiasm, but you may be working in organizations where you know many of your colleagues are not. And so one of the questions is, how do we share with them perspectives that help them at least get knowledgeable and comfortable? I have no concern. I have no problem about having people in my world, in my environment, who are dead set opposed to using AI in certain contexts. But I really only feel comfortable with those folks if they have the experience to have that opinion. If you want to have a more negative opinion about AI, that's fine. That makes sense to me if you have spent a few hours working with AI and you really understand what we're talking about. We've done a survey. We're actually now well past 3,000 responses. I haven't updated the charts, but you may be interested to see that the vast number of your colleagues, those of you who are on this call, your colleagues have heard of AI. They haven't used AI as much as you all have. Similarly, though, they don't have got guidelines from their employers. They're not using the paid stuff. And they rate their expertise more on the low end than on the high end. I do want to flag something that this wonderful writer, Professor Ethan Mollick, talks about. There's this phenomenon of secret cyborgs, and many of you that are here today may in fact be the secret cyborg in your institution. A secret cyborg is someone who's using AI, is actually probably pretty good at it already, but because the vast majority of us are working in places where there's no AI policy, we don't actually know whether our boss is going to be happy that we're using AI and are more efficient, or mad at us because they somehow think AI is cheating. And so when we don't get clear guidance from the leadership at our organizations, we have a situation where people are in fact using AI. They may be using it in ways we don't want them to. They may be putting in confidential data that they shouldn't be at this point. On the other hand, we're not benefiting from the free R&D, the free learning that many of our colleagues are doing. So even at an organization where 70% of staff don't feel very sophisticated in the use of AI, some people are using it, but we don't have systems in place to learn from them. And staff, particularly in the nonprofit sector, do have concerns. 50% say they're not really worried at all, but some do note some level of concern. They always tend to come to these 7 categories, which we group into 3 overall buckets. The first is sort of the shorter term stuff. Is AI valuable? Or is it so filled with errors and bias and concerns about data that we should just stay away? We feel like the incremental approach is a great way to begin and really mitigates most of these concerns. We can absolutely use AI, certainly in sort of the smaller beginner contexts, in a way that most of those concerns don't even come up. And then once we get more sophisticated, we can talk to our IT department and make sure we're using tools in ways that are safer in a larger context. People do worry about, will we become over reliant on AI and lose job skills? Will we lose jobs? And then in the bigger picture, we hear a lot about environmental impact. And once we really get there and people start realizing that there are in fact some pretty powerful capabilities from these tools, you get the Terminator questions. You get people who want to know whether robots are going to take over the world. I don't know that we're, super well positioned to answer some of those questions. I don't see any evidence that any of the tools that we're working with right now are heading in that direction. But we can also talk about the environmental stuff. And I think there's been some, not only have there been some developments, there's also been some ways of presenting the information that may be connected to that hype cycle that may have made things sound a little bit more dramatic than I think they may be at the moment. We can talk about any of that during the Q&A. Overwhelmingly, our colleagues want to have the kind of conversation that we're all having right now. They want to learn more. The nonprofit sector does want to learn about opportunities with artificial intelligence. And so how do you do it? I'm just going to give a couple of minutes, and then we're going to share some final examples, wrap up, and move to the Q&A. We talked about secret cyborgs. You all told us that in the survey at the beginning that most of you are working in a place where you have not been given any guidance about what is or isn't okay. If you are in leadership at a NGO, at a nonprofit organization, get some guidelines out there now. It may take you a while to come up with a full-length policy, and that's fine. But people are already using AI, so you need to send an email this week, early next week, just saying what some of the guidelines are. These are 6 examples that we find useful. Many of our partner nonprofits simply make slight edits to these and send this around to their staff the next day. AI use is encouraged. We tell folks that when you're early on your AI journey, at point 2, just tell everybody, don't put in anything confidential for now. If our organization is really in the first 3 to 6 months of finding out what's even possible, let's just have a blanket prohibition until such time as we are more comfortable. There's a lot of great stuff we can still do with publicly available information. Let's get good at AI, and then we'll worry about making sure we're thinking about the confidential data in a more sophisticated way. We do have to remind people that the human is responsible for the quality of the work. Just as when you're working with an intern or when you're working with an outside consultant, a freelancer, you don't get to turn in the work to your boss or to your ultimate constituent and have there be all kinds of mistakes and errors in it and then just blame the intern. Well, the same is true for AI. We recommend that if you're using AI, you disclose that internally. We often talk about wanting to have learning orientations, learning organizations where we are. Well, if you've used AI to generate the agenda for next week's meeting, tell everybody. It would be nice for them to know that that's a good use. Externally, it can get a little trickier. We do sometimes still have external partners and audiences that are more uncomfortable with the use of AI. And so if you have an external partner, if you have someone who's asked for a grant proposal and has told you explicitly they don't want you to use AI, don't use AI. If you think that they may be concerned about your use of AI, you may want to consider disclosing that you've used an artificial intelligence tool, or at least you may want to sit down with a supervisor or someone else in your organization and talk it through. How do you go ahead and use it safely right now? 4 rules. I think I'm sort of probably repeating what you've maybe already gathered. But if you're really towards the beginning of your journey and you're trying to ramp up your ability to reach basic literacy, start with a generalist tool. You want to build your intuition by starting with a tool that gives you access to doing lots of different things with lots of parts of your job. It is valuable to access what the tech people call a frontier level model. In many cases, if you're paying, if you're getting your own access to something like ChatGPT, it's worth spending a couple of months paying the $20 to have the access to the higher level tools, the more advanced features, more time with the advanced features. But you may be in an organization where they've actually already turned on the higher level of Copilot because you're using Microsoft, or they've already turned on the higher level of Gemini because you're living in a Google environment. But get to the generalist version. So if you have Microsoft in your organization, go type copilot.microsoft.com and log into the main chat. Don't only be using Copilot inside PowerPoint or inside Microsoft Word. And then make a point of using it in your life 1 to 2 hours every single week. You can put a calendar item and say every Thursday at 3, I'm going to say, what do I otherwise need to be working on? I'm going to try to get it done with ChatGPT. How can I learn what does and doesn't work? And start, as we said, with reading, writing, and chatting. Generative AI does work best when you think of it as a fake person. Some people say think of it like a new hire or a graduate student on their first day of work. And don't feel concerned that you have to be a tech forward, tech comfortable staff person. It may be that when our organizations were trying to roll out things like Slack or other new software tools, new databases, that having that level of technology sophistication was one of the most helpful things. With generative AI tools like ChatGPT, the most powerful skill you can have is, have you ever managed an intern before? Have you ever had to give feedback to a colleague? Those are things that many people who have very little technology sophistication actually have quite a lot of experience doing. That's the most helpful way to engage with these models. We share something we call Aspire. It's 5 directions. I print this out. I have this on my wall. I look at it all the time. It's not that different than lots of other models that other places talk about online, but be simple. We don't think prompt engineering is actually a useful context anymore. You don't need to learn some kind of special language in order to work with these tools. You just need to talk at them and give them feedback. It does help, however, to define a persona and to give information. So a persona might be to say, hi, I run a nonprofit program on AI education. You are my chief of staff. Since this tool learned how to be a fake person by reading the whole internet, when I tell them it's my chief of staff at a nonprofit effort, all of a sudden, every answer that comes afterwards, whether we're talking about spreadsheets or computer coding or writing a speech, are going to be better because it has that narrower focus. Same thing when you give it information. If you can, that was exciting. If you can upload, I'm really trying to gesticulate and get everybody excited. If you can upload documents, things like the annual report of your organization, things like your tax returns, things that are already public domain, you can help the tool, ChatGPT or something else, have significantly more context on what you're doing without violating anybody's data privacy, right? There's a lot of public domain information out there that'll help us get better conversations. Refine your question, go back and forth, and then be encouraging. Treat it like that fake person. If you don't get what you're looking for, that doesn't mean it's time to walk away. It means it's time to ask it a slightly different way or tell it what you didn't understand about its response. Really treat it like that fake person you are working with. Okay, let's look at a few more examples, and then we're going to share final important recommendations and bring on Mohammed for, I think, a powerful series of Q&A. All right, let me see if I can get these other examples up on the screen. So here's a little one just to sort of share something that's different than working in words all the time. I just want to give a brief example of working with what we might call unstructured data. In this case, there was a long list of people on a website. It was just one of those About Us web pages that had 40 people listed and a whole bunch of names, titles, companies, different every time. Some people had middle initials, some people didn't. Some people had their title listed, some people didn't. Some people had 2 organizations. I wanted it all in a spreadsheet so that I could follow up with those people later. Rather than asking my colleague to type it all in and spend 45 minutes just tabbing back and forth between the web page and the spreadsheet, I simply pasted it all into ChatGPT and I said, please organize this into a table. And in 10 seconds, I get a spreadsheet. First name, last name, title, organization, and I can click that little button and download it to a spreadsheet file on my desktop. So that's something that, could save me or one of my colleagues 30 minutes in a day. Does it totally transform the way we do all of our work? No. But when that becomes part of your day-to-day experience, you can see how these things tend to add up. Here's something that's a little bit more around marketing and communications. Many of us in the social sector have documents, interesting reports, maybe a grant report, maybe something we've had to submit to a government agency that has a ton of useful, interesting information, but is kind of dry, maybe even a little boring. This was an 80-page academic report that a nonprofit wrote about boosting sustainable homeownership. So I uploaded information, right? That was giving it information from our Aspire framework. Now here's a persona. You are the special assistant to the VP of marketing. And then I said, do all of the following things. Write an outline for a 60-minute webinar based on that report where the audience is high net worth donors. And then I said, actually go to the website of the nonprofit, see who works there, and plug the names of our real staff people into the roles in the webinar. Then create some LinkedIn posts to promote the webinar, write the Twitter posts to promote the webinar. And then we need 5 minutes of opening remarks from our CEO, but I don't want your boring, plain vanilla language. So go watch this video of our CEO speaking to the public and get a sense of who he is, his speaking style, and then write 5 minutes of opening remarks that we will use at that webinar. Okay, so I uploaded that boring 80-page report and I typed in about 5 minutes of direction, and I immediately get a webinar outline with the names of our real staff people. Nikki should do the overview of the report because they're the director of research, and then Chelsea will come in and do the case studies. I said actually put some board members in there. It gave me a second draft with no complaint. Then I get LinkedIn posts. Well, if I want, and Twitter posts, if I want different tone for my LinkedIn posts, I said, give me a wide range of style options. Now I get 7 different LinkedIn posts, right? So I took everything it gave me as a first draft and I asked for more drafts. And then, of course, it writes those opening remarks from our CEO. I didn't give it any guidance on what opening remarks ought to contain, but it's read the whole internet. It knows what opening remarks are when a nonprofit CEO is talking to some wealthy donors. So it puts it all together. It reads the original report, and it even remembers that our CEO is going to want to thank the donors. So it says, thank you to the city of Detroit and the Wells Fargo Foundation. Pretty thoughtful and sophisticated. Now, do I think the CEO should read this verbatim? No. But if this is the first draft of their remarks, if this is only halfway towards helping him know what he needs to write, and we were able to get all this done in 5 minutes of conversation with ChatGPT, that's a pretty remarkable value add. Here's something that's a little bit more like data analysis. So in order to show you those pie charts earlier about what nonprofit staff think of AI, I uploaded a spreadsheet. I said, read it. Tell me what fields are listed in the spreadsheet. These were the names of all the questions, right? Have you ever used those tools? How would you rate your expertise? But instead of having to do the work with a spreadsheet or Canva or some data analysis tool, I can actually just talk to ChatGPT about data, create attractive pie charts for items 4, 6, 7, etc. I even gave it specifics. If it's a yes/no question, make the yes green and the no red. So I gave it some design guidance. And it immediately created charts for me from those questions. If I wanted to change the colors, I could change the colors. If I want to download those graphics, I could download the graphics and put them into a PowerPoint presentation. And then I say, do narrative analysis on one of the questions where I had invited people to type things in. Here are some themes with direct quotes from what people had to say. So is this as sophisticated as if I had given a PhD colleague a half a day to work with the data set? Absolutely not. but to get a first look at some pretty robust data with thousands and thousands of entries in about 10 minutes is a pretty valuable use of my time. I'm going to show two others really quickly, and then we'll wrap up. Here's a grant proposal. This is something that many of us have to do on a regular basis. This is a real one. This is something I actually did just a couple weeks ago. As you know, I lead the AI for Nonprofit Sprint. I need your help writing a letter of inquiry, that's an LOI, for grant funding. So first, I just uploaded some information about us. I uploaded the PowerPoint slides you've been looking at, and then I uploaded a 2-page overview of our program. Now, ChatGPT knows all the latest about who I am and what we do. Then I uploaded the information about the grant from the funder, just this PDF document. And I give some directions. I say, these folks don't know anything about us. We'll need to give them background in an impressive, inspiring way. And I even say, everything I uploaded to you is only about what we're doing right now. But for the proposal, we want to create something called phase 2 that's going to be even bigger. Great. It reads the document from the foundation. You're going to have to write these 3 200-word responses. Here's how you want me to do it. I say, okay, great. We're going to ask for $450,000. And it does it. Here's the project summary, 200 words. It was exactly right. I didn't change a single word. Then I said, now we're doing this impact statement. Here's 200 words. I didn't love it. So I gave some redirection. I said, you know what, go ahead and reread the directions. That's too repetitive with phase 1. Make sure you're giving them what they're looking for. And I get a second draft of the impact statement. Perfect. I'll take it. So on until we finish the entire grant proposal. It writes about our track record, it writes about me and my background. All of these are words completely generated by ChatGPT. And literally 15 minutes after starting the conversation, I submitted it. What I didn't mention was I learned about this funding opportunity on the deadline of its due date. So there's no way I could have written this any other way. But I was able to sit down with ChatGPT, write the grant proposal, and get it out. Fingers crossed, I will let you know once we hear back whether we got the money. Something slightly different just to show off a little bit of a different angle, and this will be the last example I show before we wrap up the presentation. I was the executive director, I think I mentioned at the beginning, of a really wonderful nonprofit called Safe Passage Project that works with immigrant young people. I uploaded 1,000 pages of financial information, 10 documents, the annual tax returns for 5 years and the audited financial report for 5 years. Now, in keeping with everything I've said about incremental AI, all of these documents are already publicly listed on the website. So even if I was nervous about, quote, giving this data to OpenAI, and I'm not, I've clicked the boxes, I've asked them not to use my data for training sets. OpenAI makes some pretty rigorous assurances about how to protect our information. But even if I said, you know, I don't trust that, I don't want to put anything that's private, all of this was already public data. 1,000 pages of financials. And then I said, in this case, act like a nonprofit accountant. Perform some fancy financial analysis. Well, it reads 1,000 pages of financials, and it starts doing the math. Here's revenue over 5 years. Here's expenses over 5 years. Net assets. These are pretty common financial terms. Now it does start to get a little fancy. Let's run some liquidity ratios. Let's do something called fundraising efficiency. Let's do growth rate. Let's do a CAGR. It notes in one of the documents that we took out one of those loans from the federal government during COVID. And it writes a summary. Great. Now remember, I didn't upload a spreadsheet that said revenue in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, so it could just do a formula. I uploaded PDFs of our tax returns. So that had revenue on page 7 of one document and page 11 of another document and page 4 on another document. And ChatGPT in seconds was able to read and compare across all those documents and give me absolutely correct information about financial position. And then I can say, make some charts. Great. Here's revenue versus expense over 5 years. Here's net asset growth over 5 years. We had good years when I was there. Here's your fundraising efficiency, and on, and you can keep going with the conversation. So, as I said before, I have the privilege of running this thing called the AI for Nonprofits Sprint out of the fund for the city of New York. We are not restricting the program to New York. That's the name of our organization, but not the limit on who we work with. We're working with those 100 organizations, 5,000 workers. We have some amazing partners, many of whom are here participating in this conversation today, and 87 nonprofits that are already signed up for our formal work. Next month, we have the privilege of working again with OpenAI, and Mohammed will be with us again. We'll be doing a more advanced workshop. So we'll be talking about some of the more sophisticated features available in ChatGPT. Today was really just chatting back and forth with the main window of ChatGPT, but we're going to look at some of the cooler, exciting features a month from now. And so the same place that you went to sign up for this event, we hope you'll join and tell your friends that it's available to come and take a look next month for the advanced features course. And even though we're all full with partners for the AI Sprint, if you are interested and if you're considering joining, if you'd like to be a part of a community of nonprofits that's working to bring all of their staff to AI literacy, snap this QR code, follow up with us, join us for the waitlist for the AI Sprint, and we'll be sharing some resources with all the organizations that follow up here, so that even if you can't formally be a part of our ongoing programming, we'll make sure you have access to videos, to tools, and to other ways that you can help your colleagues get further along the path towards AI literacy. So that's it. That's what I have to present to you all today. I'm so thrilled to be with you. I think I'm gonna give this 5 more seconds for people to snap the code. And then I'm going to stop sharing and invite my colleagues and friends, Alex and Mohammed, to join, and we'll start taking some questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich. That was really great. I'm going to bring Mohammed in here. And Mohammed, do you just want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Hey, everyone. My name is Mohammed Hussein. I'm an engineer with OpenAI. So I work very closely on public sector and nonprofits. So Alex and I work very closely together. And really, I serve as a sort of technology partner to help, as Rich sort of elegantly did over the last 60 minutes, explain the technology, explain the use cases, and demonstrate the way that people in a variety of use cases can apply the technology to their work. So just a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you. So we have a ton of questions coming in. We had over 1,000 people join, which is phenomenal. And we have 60 questions and counting. I'm going to try to group some of them together, and we'll see what we have time for. So to kick off, there are a lot of questions about privacy and data protection. So I'm going to try to group some of those together. And Mohammed, maybe you can take this one first. So David from Toronto asks, if we enter sensitive information like client data or internal documents into ChatGPT, how secure is that? Does OpenAI store that data? Is it used to train our models? If we have a paid plan, does that change anything? How should people think about these types of questions around privacy and data protection? Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Alex. Let me take a swing at this one. So yeah, we get this question a lot. So there's a couple of different things. So first is from like your direct perspective, right? We have an opt-out feature in ChatGPT that's available to everyone, whether you're on like a free plan or a pro plan or a plus plan, where you can opt out of any of your data being used for training purposes. So it's 2 clicks. You just go to settings and then data controls, turn off. There's a setting for use my data to improve my models for everyone, the models for everyone. If you toggle that off, that ensures that your data never gets used for training. And on our business plans like enterprise and teams, that's just off by default. talking a little bit more about like, we get this question a lot. And one of the things I want to sort of flag is that we do train on a lot of data. We train on a lot of public data, but we don't train on PII. We're not looking for PII to train on. That doesn't make our models better. There's many stages to training models, and one of them is pre-training. That's sort of the step that includes the canonical, like looking at every document and every report across the internet. We do a lot of filtering of that data because not all of it is valuable and useful, right? So you can think of it, one use case being toxic and harmful, explicit content. We explicitly filter that content out during the training process. Another part of it is PII, because just because if I know Alex's address, or the model knows Alex's address, that's almost never useful broadly to a global populace, right? So from a training perspective, we filter this out aggressively. And from like a user control perspective, if you're concerned about what happens when I accidentally upload a document, you always have that opt-out feature on any account to ensure that that data is never used for training. And we do store that data, right? And anybody who's used ChatGPT knows this, because if you open up the side tab, you can see all those previous conversations, right? So we do store it for a period of time, but after, I think, it depends on the plan, but I think about 30 days it automatically gets deleted. So we only store it for the purposes of you being able to go back and see what conversations you had. So there's a lot of things I talked about the pre-training, talked about the data control. We do encrypt the data at rest and in transit. There's more technical details that we can go over, but I'm going to pause there. I think like there's part of the responsibilities on us is to filter out a lot of that data during the training stages, and then we also make it opt out for you all if that's something that's of concern to you, to explicitly opt out of that process so that none of your data ever gets used in training. It's only ever temporarily stored and then eventually discarded. I'm going to pause.
Can I ask a little follow-up on that, just based on questions from folks in our network? So some of the nonprofits we work with are in really regulated environments. They're working with large databases of foster children, and they have state contracts and sort of legal responsibilities, or they're legal providers and they have responsibilities as attorneys. Yep. Where is OpenAI in terms of compliance with things like HIPAA, SOC, with sort of European regulations? Like, does OpenAI sort of promise to align with certain different kinds of data security standards? Because all the organizations I'm working with are in fact sharing all of that data through their Microsoft SharePoint, or their Google Drive, but their IT department has affirmed that those companies have promised to keep things secure in a certain way. So they're storing all that same confidential data in the cloud, but they've gotten comfortable enough. Where's OpenAI on that?
Yeah, I would say very far along, right? So several of the things you've mentioned, we've already support. So things like GDPR, we do have GDPR support on ChatGPT and our API. So part of the delineation is we have really two platforms. We have ChatGPT, which is a product that we spent a lot of time on today. And then we have the platform product, which is basically the APIs that actually ChatGPT is built off of. So, it's kind of different because the accreditations are slightly different on both. But talking largely, HIPAA is another one you mentioned. Our APIs are HIPAA accredited. And I support a lot of our public sector work. So we're always getting asked questions about encryption and logging and monitoring and third-party audits, things like ISO 27K1. These are things that we track. And, if you're an enterprise customer, or even if you're just curious, we have a trust portal, like trust.openai.com. We have our pen test reports. We have, our third-party assessments. As we work for things, we already have TextRamp, which is a Texas-specific, security framework. But on the public sector side, we're very concerned about FedRAMP, which is a federal-specific one. So, we're in the process of getting, our platforms, federally accredited through the FedRAMP Moderate and FedRAMP High process. So I think short answer is, if you're curious, you can go to trust.openai.com. A lot of those artifacts are public, especially if you have a .gov email, then you actually you can probably get access to all of those documents, list out all those artifacts. But we do take, those accreditations very seriously. And many of the ones you mentioned are things we already have or things that are soon to be coming.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, I have a couple practical questions. So Ayana from Cambridge asks, I use ChatGPT to generate consistent brand voice and tone. Is there a way to replicate that across accounts so our whole team works from the same template?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of sort of consistency, one of the things we've looked at is custom GPTs. So custom GPTs, we sort of mentioned a little bit earlier, but they're a way to sort of have tailored versions of ChatGPT that are aligned to very specific workflows. So let's say that you work in comms and you're generating press statements, or you're generating media strategies, and you wanted to maintain a consistent tone. And every time people use ChatGPT, you wanted to maintain a specific tone and follow certain instructions. Custom GPTs are a good way to codify those instructions and preferences into a way that every time you talk to ChatGPT in using the custom GPT, it always has that sort of upstream context. So that's sort of one way. We also have things called custom instructions. So if you go into your settings page, and you go to settings and personalization, you can set something called custom instructions. So it'll say, what should ChatGPT call you? What's a little bit about you? What traits should ChatGPT have? So those are just ways to tailor ChatGPT for all interactions, not aligned to very specific workflows. So to summarize what I just said, and Rich, if you have any thoughts too on some of your experience aligning the voice, would love to hear it. But there's custom GPTs, especially if you have specific workflows where you need consistency on the tone and voice. That's a great use case. And then again, if you go to your settings and personalization, you can be even more specific about governing the rules of engagement for all your interactions with ChatGPT. But Rich, over to you if you have any thoughts here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is very much what we've seen. There's also some stuff if you are on an enterprise account or sort of a Teams account. There's some settings you can manage that can be uniform across multiple users. And then just to remind people, I can't remember if you said this, Mohammed, but the custom GPTs, you have total control over the sharing and privacy levels. So they can be a little something that's like an app in an app store and anyone in the world can find it, but you can also designate the specific people that you work with to have access to it. So it really is sort of confidential to you and your team to approach things in that way.
Great. Stick with some of the kind of practical questions we're getting. So Carlos from Denver asks, can we customize ChatGPT to reflect our nonprofit's mission, and how would we do that?
Yeah, so like I said, setting custom instructions are key. And we spent a lot of time in this session today talking about prompt engineering. I do think it's like a good muscle to have. So setting things like custom instructions in your settings is useful. I think just usually, or one thing I'll step back and say is that as we produce new models, they get very, very good at what we call instruction following, which means understanding the full context of everything you say and really leaning into that as it generates a response. So what that means in practice is if you say, I work as a grants director at a nonprofit, or I work in fundraising or advocacy, it's very easily able to pick up on that mission or pick up on that particular profile and align the response to that. So usually it's as simple as just providing it a couple sentences of context, and the models are really good at now steering towards that particular focus area. So that's what I'll say. Again, we talked about the custom GPTs, talked about the instructions, but I think there's a lot of I know there's a lot of consternation about prompt engineering. And I think one of the things to say is as we develop new models, they get better and better at picking up context from just a few things, and soon potentially even your own past conversations, right? It'll be able to understand that context as well. But Rich, over to you if you have any other thoughts here, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm actually just gonna share my own personal custom instructions so people can see. So this is my personal ChatGPT account. If you go into the upper right, you click your name, and you just click that customize ChatGPT function. And I have some, because I like those 5 rules where I actually like ChatGPT to always have that persona. I have custom rules in here. So I actually tell ChatGPT, if I forgot to give you a certain role to play, ask me if you should be playing a role. And I tell it every time I'm working with you, I want you to ask me clarifying questions before you actually do the job. So I just have sort of ways I like working with my fake colleague. And then it says, yeah, anything else we should know about you? I just put in my bio, so it knows where I'm working, it knows what I'm up to. And so it always starts from scratch there. And then for individuals, there is this great feature called projects. And I don't think it's quite as shareable yet. But in projects, I have a project for our AI sprint. I have a specific set of instructions, and I have 7 documents that give a ton of context about what we do as an organization that are permanently in there. And I've saved a whole bunch of past chats in here, which sort of go into its kind of permanent memory. And so every time I come back to this project feature, it's starting with all of this context and background and history, so I don't have to kind of repeat myself. It's not like I'm starting from scratch, like one of those movies where the person doesn't have any short-term memory.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. Projects are like fairly new if folks haven't seen them, but fantastic way, especially if you're doing like a short-term project and you want it to retain context. It's a fantastic one. So for one example we saw is, sort of event planning. You're planning a gala, you're planning a big event. You're looking for venues, you're looking for catering, you're looking for transport, drafting content. As Rich sort of showed, you can upload files to that. So if you have a charter of what you're looking for, hey, gala in June, it's going to be at the Kennedy Center or a specific venue, 500 people focused on this. You can give that you can upload that project, upload that file to that project, and every time you have a conversation within that project, it's going to have that as context. I think that was a fantastic example.
And for those that are further along or have even just sort of noticed some words and buttons appearing in their ChatGPT accounts, over the past couple of months, the session that we're doing next month, I think Mohammed will sort of prep a little bit on it, but I want to talk about projects and custom GPTs and deep research and Canvas and a whole bunch of cool things that are now available that I'm increasingly using. And I think my recommendation, if you're still early on your journey and you're with us today, try to get your 10 hours of practice in before May, and then you're going to come in raring to go.
Awesome. So Rich, I want to ask a couple of questions about nonprofit use cases that we're getting. The first, I'm going to combine 2 here. The first is from Smita in Chicago, and she asks, what are the most common use cases that you're seeing from nonprofits? And then the second, and I love this question from Kelvin in Nairobi, is how can AI be used for data collection, analysis, and monitoring and evaluation? I know M&E is like a huge part of a lot of nonprofits' work. It can be a very complicated part. So wanted to highlight that one.
Yeah, that's great. And so in terms of use cases, it really does depend on your role. So one of the things we do at the AI Sprint is we have monthly facilitated work groups where people break out by functional area. And we kind of ask people who live in spreadsheet land to go off into their own rooms and have a chat, and people who live more in sort of management and language land. So if your responsibility is around fundraising and marketing and communications, it's definitely about generating language. It's often about brainstorming. So, generative AI tools are amazing and tireless brainstormers. And so sometimes throwing up a generative AI tool onto a shared, if you're physically together, you can put it on the conference room, projector, or if it's sort of with you when you're talking, you're on a video call with one another. Just saying, hey, we're doing this event, we're doing that gala, or we're having our team retreat, and we need to come up with a name for it. Don't ask it for 5 examples, ask it for 50. It's got unlimited capacity. One thing that some of our partners do is you ask it for 10 examples, and then you say, I liked 3, 7, and 9 the best. Give me 50 more like those, right? So you're sort of like having it teach itself how to do even more brainstorming. One thing I want to add that is not necessarily a nonprofit specific use case, but that I'm increasingly hearing on a regular basis is that our colleagues who are neurodivergent, who see the world, sometimes communicate in different ways, are increasingly using tools like ChatGPT, even if their company isn't providing them, to change the way they're communicating. So if we ourselves or our colleagues have been given feedback our whole careers, wow, you sound so cold, or why are you always so direct or blunt? We're increasingly finding that people are writing the email that they would have written anyway, and then asking the robot to make them sound more human, right? They're going to ChatGPT and saying, can you actually warm this up? Because that's something that I need in my in my practice, and that's for staff all over the place. And then, yeah, I have we've seen use cases of people in HR who have to deal with multiple databases and are working with ChatGPT to write, who don't know anything about coding or writing scripts, but they know that's a real thing. And they're asking ChatGPT to create the code that they can paste into Microsoft Excel that just turns an HR export that was written as last name, comma, first name, middle initial, and turns it into the right format so that they can upload it into a federal government, HR program. So, all kinds of use cases depending on where you are. And the stuff that I personally find the most rewarding is the role playing, particularly when we're making that available to colleagues who may lack formal education. So when we have opportunities to be working with people who are doing really great work with communities in need, but don't necessarily have that college degree or the more formal training in how to write a memo, how to create a meeting agenda, how to talk to a frustrated parent who's coming into the drop-in site, to be able to give that professional development opportunity 100 times a week at 3 a.m, whenever people need that opportunity. It actually really drives a DEI agenda. It allows us to create a more inclusive environment where we can take advantage of people's great strengths and not have the sort of more formal education bits be barriers. On the data and M&E side, I will say that I have, the sort of straight up use, and Mohammed, I think maybe I'd love to hear your thoughts too. From my perspective, I feel like the data analysis I get out of this tool is 95% good, which in many, many cases is totally good for me. Like when we're trying to get quick, interim assessments. Alex, you should talk about this too. Your years at IPA. I mean, this is what you're all about, right? I am not yet convinced that the tool is providing randomized control level, sort of, academic research level output where, without having to double check a lot of its work, I'm totally confident in sort of the analysis it's doing. But one of the things it's really good at is cleaning up messy data, is, taking spreadsheets where the things were typed into the wrong columns or they were collected out in the field. And we have a lot of like handwritten data sets, and you can now get things scanned and uploaded and put into spreadsheets really quickly. Those are some of the things that I'm most excited about from the M&E perspective. I'd love to hear from both of you. I think that's I'm curious what you're finding as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think there's a few ways that I use it. I think one is for just getting like quick and dirty insights from a data set, maybe something that doesn't need to be 100% accurate. For example, the survey that we sent out at the beginning, if you were to upload that to ChatGPT and say, what are some of the common questions? Can you graph these levels of experience that people are sharing? I think that's really great. I think another way that you can do more advanced data analysis is by instructing the model to use Python. And I think that's something where I only know a little bit of Python, but when I was doing M&E, we used Stata, which no one uses anymore. But it's really powerful to learn how to use some Python for data analysis. And I think that that's something that you could apply to M&E and kind of data analysis more generally as well.
Cool.
Cool. Then let me see. I think time for a couple more questions. We have a few questions along the lines of this, so let me raise one. Lisa from Miami says, can you speak more to the environmental impacts of AI that were mentioned earlier in the session? Mohammed, do you want to start there? And then Rich, you can add on.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a great call out, and my wife works in sustainability, so I get this question all the time. So let me talk about this one. I do think there's a lot of energy consumption in the training of these models. I think that's a known fact. And maybe one thing I'm going to call 3 things to attention to what we're doing about it, and then I'll talk a little bit about reconciling some misconceptions around what energy consumption means in this space. So, Sam Altman considers, climate change to be a, very important issue. So one thing that, 3 things that we're doing in this space, the first one is, hardware level efficiency. So it's in our economic incentives to get the most out of these very expensive GPUs that we're spending a lot of money on.
Those are the computer chips, right, Mohammed? The GPU.
Yeah, that's right. So everyone's seen like NVIDIA is, sky high stock. They sell the GPUs that power that's the hardware that powers a lot of our AI models, amongst other, partners and vendors. So from an economic alignment perspective, it's in our interest to squeeze out the performance. And we have huge hardware teams that spend all day doing nothing but finding ways to exact efficiencies, from this hardware so that we can serve more users on a smaller hardware footprint and concomitantly have a lower energy consumption, both on a training basis and a serving basis. So that's the first part. The second part is when we're serving models, that means you guys are asking questions and the model is giving back response. There's training the model and then there's like serving it. One thing we're looking very closely at is mini models. So you might have seen during Rich's demo, there was like 4.0 and 4.0 mini, and other models like O1 and O1 mini, O3 and O3 mini. And the idea behind these mini models is that they're, from a model perspective, they're smaller in parameter size, which means it's much more cheap to serve to users. So if 1 million people ask the big models of questions, can be a much bigger energy footprint versus asking 1 million questions of these mini models. Now there's a trade-off there because you're going to get higher intelligence with bigger models. But one of the things we're looking at is training these smaller models to be very, very good at specific tasks. So you don't have to always ask the big model. And the third thing that I'm really excited about is the open source piece, which will effectively, so if folks didn't see it, we're going to be releasing model weights for new models so that you can take the model and deploy it anywhere, right? And so from an environmental perspective, environmental impact perspective, that can potentially lead to a world where you're, running these models on your phone or on your laptop instead of these, big data centers. And again, from an engineering perspective, that forces us to think about designing ever more efficient, models that don't require such a high energy footprint. So, I think the main point is that we recognize this is, a big thing. There's strong economic alignments in place to bring down the cost of the energy. And then the 2 points I'm going to sort of rebut on sort of the environmental footprints. I always hear, several cups of water to answer, a single, GPT query. There was actually a Nature report that came out that talked about the environmental footprint of using AI to complete tasks. And one of the most interesting things it brought up was that, if you compare the environmental footprint of AI completing a task versus a human completing the same tasks, it was 100 times less efficient for the environment for the human to complete the task versus AI, because AI writing a report is, seconds of GPU time versus a human taking hours to complete that report, which I thought was sort of an interesting finding. And the second statistic I thought was interesting was that if you look at OpenAI ChatGPT usage over a single year, the water consumption used to sustain those servers is on the order of hundreds of times less than the amount of water we leak in the US through leaky pipes nationwide. So, that's not to say that we don't have a strong role to play in, but I think part of it's, the responsibility that we take as an organization to develop more efficient models. And there's an alignment in place to make sure that, we want to build models that are more efficient as well as more intelligent. And part of it is just understanding a little bit of the misconception that, the water and energy required to run these and sustain these models is actually not as high as we think, especially as we compare it to our own carbon footprint, as well as the carbon footprint of other larger structural issues. So I'm going to pause there. Talked a lot about this. I don't know, Rich, if you have some thoughts there, we'd love to hear it, or Alex. I'm going to pause there.
Can I just do 15 seconds, Alex? I care a lot about this, and I also get asked this question a lot. I'll go even further on the energy side, because I really tried to scratch down and dig, and there's a lot of factoids that you get in a blog post, and I've tried to do the clicking the source and then the source of that and then the source of that. And on the energy side, and particularly on the carbon emissions impact on climate change piece, my best understanding is that data centers in the United States are taking something on the order of 5% of electricity consumption in the whole country. And that's not only AI, that's also watching Netflix and, there was an article years and years ago that the video streams of the Despacito music video like took more energy consumption than 5 entire countries in Eastern Africa, in 1 year. So there's a lot of stuff that we're streaming and running off of data centers, and so let's say half of the 5% is AI at this point. But then electricity consumption is only 24% of carbon emissions in this country. So then you sort of reduce that again by a factor of 4. And my best understanding is that AI is responsible for something like 0.7, 0.8% of carbon emissions in this country at this moment. And so what I say is, if you are at a place where someone is walking around the office and turning off every computer and every monitor every night, and you're not going to conferences, flying on planes, and you're really paying attention to carbon footprint, then I think being really serious about the carbon footprint of AI use makes a ton of sense. I'm not in one of those places. I make compromises and sort of understand different perspectives on my carbon footprint in different ways. And so for me, something that represents likely 0.7% of my carbon footprint is not my top priority.
Awesome. So I just want to wrap up with a couple of housekeeping questions that we're getting. One is about whether this is recorded and if it will be posted. Yes, it should be up on the OpenAI Academy website within a day or two. So the same page where you registered for this event will have a replay option that you'll be able to watch or share with your colleagues. Second is, people are asking if OpenAI has a nonprofit discount. We do, and I've actually just turned on a link. Mohammed has to drop, so thank you, Mohammed. Thanks for joining.
Thanks all.
I turned on a link to our discount page. You can learn more about it. Hold on. There you go. And it is applicable globally. So organizations around the world can apply for our nonprofit discount, including in the UK. I saw someone ask about that. Not every type of organization is eligible, but most nonprofits are. So you can read more about it on that help page and reach out to OpenAI's help center if you have any questions. Awesome. So, with that, just really want to say thank you to Rich for leading such a clear and thoughtful session on how nonprofits can begin using AI. We're super excited about the session next month to get in a little bit deeper about more advanced features of AI. So people should register for that if they haven't already. And we have a ton of nonprofit stuff coming. I'm really excited about it. So more content, more events. So stay tuned. If you're really interested in this topic, we should have a lot of great resources for you and your colleagues as well. So with that, thank you all for joining. Thanks, Rich, for leading, and we will see you next time. Bye, everyone.